Welcome to the Friday vlog.
Welcome to the Friday vlog.
And we had a question come our way this week around how to navigate teenage acting out behavior. And so we thought we would talk a little bit about that today.
Because we're experts in teenage acting out behavior.
No. And we want to be clear that there's no one size fits all, but we thought we would share a little bit about what we've seen. And also I wanted to point out our podcast episode this week with Jackie Moses. She has a really beautiful example of navigating a very challenging situation with a young woman that was living with her. And I thought she really demonstrated beautifully how to navigate that kind of situation when it feels very extreme.
Yeah, that's a really good story. And I'm sure we've all got plenty of stories that may illustrate this point. Makes me think of something that cropped up with a client of mine in the last couple of weeks. And I won't go into the nuts and bolts of what happened, but it did involve acting out teenager, and it did involve a perceived boundary being crossed. I don't know if that boundary had been established before said boundary was crossed.
Or was it perhaps an assumed boundary?
Maybe an assumed boundary, but nevertheless it would be logical to think that this would be a boundary that shouldn't be crossed. So it created a lot of ill feeling and resentment, perhaps on the adult, because I guess as us adults would be inclined to believe there are certain behaviours that a teenage might act out. You'd think, is this a normal human being that we're dealing with here? Wouldn't it be safe to assume that they should not? No one in actual fact should be crossing this boundary. I mean, I think we've all had those experiences. And this client I was kind of really impressed because this client knew when that happened, despite the fact it was a really difficult situation, and there was a lot of feeling on his part, was that he had enough presence of mind to realise it's like, yeah, I shouldn't have this conversation now. I'll wait till I feel settled. And it was a significant wait. It was there's another part of us that feel like, wow, that's such the level of that transgression is such that we need to handle it immediately in the moment. And the more that time goes by, the more that we miss that moment and that opportunity to make to course correct. But it took him a few days to get to a point where he felt neutral. And when he got to that place of neutrality and picked his moment perfectly when the teenager was settled, he was able to have a really impactful conversation. And it was more of a philosophical conversation rather than like, you're this and you're that and, this can't happen again. It was not like him, coming down on him like a ton of bricks, which is probably what would have happened in the moment. It was him like trying to be philosophical about it and have a conversation. And he was just amazed by how well received that was, and how things evidently got themselves back on a very even keel with a much higher level of rapport. So the teenager could see the folly of their ways, but also rapport was really increased, which is fantastic. But it's so easy to go rush in and think I can fix this, and I have to fix it now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key pieces, to recognize that often as parents or family members, when we have a young person who's engaging in risky behavior or is acting out in ways that's really concerning for us, that our tendency is to respond to that inner urgency that we feel and act from that place. And often when we have conversations in that way, the goodwill, the rapport, the understanding, the learning opportunity really gets lost, because we usually fall on deaf ears. I know I've experienced that when I've tried to do that. And so one of the things that I think is so helpful to remember is to really recognize that in addition to that intensity and that urgency, there's also a deeper knowing that can guide us even in those kinds of situations. And that's really what Jackie pointed out to in the podcast that we did with her, is that even though there was this level of urgency, she also was able to hear a deeper knowing inside of her that said, not now, I don't need to address this now. So obviously if there's an immediate safety issue that needs to be handled, then that deeper knowing would say, yes, handle this now, act. And usually we don't have to second guess those moments. We usually just act and respond when that's going on. But when we have that urgency, but there isn't an immediate need to address it, there's that opportunity, like you're saying in your example, for us as adults to be able to take that pause and allow our intensity, our emotional intensity to settle before addressing what our concerns are with the young person. And it's not sort of shirking our parental responsibility. It's not trying to be friends with them. It's really recognizing what's the best environment and circumstances to have a reasonable conversation in which they're going to be able to hear and hopefully learn something, and that they'll be able to be potentially problem solving that will allow a new common ground to be felt. And that doesn't mean that there might not be natural consequences that are going to occur based on actions taken, but it's felt very differently when that's common sense rather than when that's really sort of being perceived as this really enraged, upset parent who's not very much in control of their own emotional experience, now just metering out punishment in that way.
I'm sorry, I've got something in my eye.
Are you okay?
I will be professional and I'll continue.
Are you all right?
I'm good. Yeah, I think that there's something about, and I think obviously some people are more sensitive than others in terms of how they find themselves responding to anger or an angry parent. But that's something for the parent to consider in terms of getting their needs met. If one is delivering one's course correction with a high level of anger, the teenager is trying to process that anger rather than actually hear the course correction.
Yeah.
They're more likely to get more caught up in the anger, the sentiment of that anger, than the actual practical nature of that course correction. I know that for me, being sensitive to anger, that would be really hard for me to sort of feel like I can have ears to hear what's being pointed to. And obviously that's first and foremost what's important for the parent, is to feel like they're going to be heard. So my client had the presence of mind to know that he will feel much better heard, or had an instinct that he will be much better heard if he's coming from a neutral mindset.
Yeah.
And waited it out. But it's so easy to sort of want to go rushing in.
Yeah, and I think that if we look at it for ourselves, if somebody's coming at us with a intense, angry feeling, it's very easy to get defensive. I mean, I'm hopefully not always going to be defensive when that happens, but it's easy for those defense mechanisms to kick in rather than being curious about what's going on.
Yeah, and I think a teenage mind is going to be automatically probably going to be going in that direction. How do I defend myself against the full weight of that anger, rather than being able to hear the practical, course corrective feedback.
Mm-hmm.
A kid of that age is still sort of trying to figure out their way in the world, and that's going to be hard to be able to hear.
And also I think when we're able to take that pause and then actually have a conversation, we can have our ears open too, because it's often we're often befuddled at some of the choices that are made,
that's right.
And we don't understand what was being thought at the time. And so when we have our ears open and we can really understand what's going on and see through their eyes and understand why their logic made sense in that moment, then there's often a lot more opportunity to look for different possibilities when we have that level of understanding.
Yeah, and I think it's also a respect that the teenager also has access to the same universal wisdom that we do, and that hopefully we can find some common ground where we both tap into it. And the good news about that is, for the parent, that creates better rapport, and for the teenager, it's actually, wow, this adult has some confidence in my ability to tap into that part of myself that will hopefully offer a different way forward that's more healthy and helpful.
Yeah. So I would say if we're going to break it down into steps, I would say the first thing to look for is, can we have a conversation with our young person from a settled place within ourselves? Can we be in an open-hearted place, even though it may be a very important, serious conversation? What's the feeling that we're coming from when we're having that conversation? And then secondly, when we're having that conversation, can we be seeking to understand? Can we be curious? And can we really look to see, like, how did this make sense in a genuine way, not in a that kind of way, which, again, I've been guilty of that. And so to be able to come to it from a good feeling, to have open ears, open heart, really be curious, look for understanding. And then in that kind of environment, learning happens, finding possibilities happens. People can come together to figure out how to move forward and what the solution might be.
Yeah, and I guess the rule of thumb, to really distill it down, is that the leverage that the adult is looking for comes in the good feeling. It's never going to be achieved out of anger, or rarely achieved. There's always going to be a price to pay on that front.
Yeah, and we all know that it can be hard, and so we encourage you to be gentle with yourself if you find yourself in a difficult parenting situation, and if you have lost your temper, and there's always an opportunity to apologize and do the repair work around that. I know that I've done that numerous times, and probably not done it enough times.
And may do it again.
I'm sure. So
inevitably.
Parenting is not easy. It's something that really has to draw out our best selves, and sometimes it can be challenging. So to just remember to be kind with yourself as you're navigating things, especially if it's a challenging time.
Parenting is a growing age that never goes away, right?
Yeah, well, I always want to be growing and learning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What are we doing here if not to grow and learn?
That's right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this and have a wonderful weekend.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Hopefully it's a peaceful weekend.
It's a peaceful weekend.
Take care.
Take care.